Hey everybody, welcome to MinnMax. I am Jeff Marchiafava. We got a special one today.
That's right.
Who am I here with?
Suriel Vazquez.
And Jack Gardner.
Jack Gardner.
That's me.
It's good to see you, Jack.
It's good to see you, Jeff.
It's been a while. Jack, you are a longtime friend of Game Informer.
I am.
I've
been around.
We could say that you've been a friend of MinnMax from the very beginning.
You could
all
say
those
that.
many moons ago.
Yeah, just that long history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's been established.
Yes.
Yes.
In the lore.
Yeah, ever since we
MinnMax
established
lore.
this in a
MinnMax
basement
lore.
in the 90s.
Yes. One person we don't have here today is Ben Hansen, right?
That's right. The coward Ben Hansen.
Yes, he's been banished to a galaxy
right.
far, far away where they haven't beaten Jedi
That's
Fallen
right.
Order. Which is what we're here to talk about today. We should probably get straight to that.
Yeah.
This is a Max Spoilers episode.
That's right.
We will be talking about Jedi Fallen Order. One of these days, we'll promise we'll do a Max Spoilers about something that's not Star Wars related. But
That
so
day's
far,
not today.
2 for 2. We did The Mandalorian 2. So, what'd you guys think?
I overall like the story. I will preface this by saying I'm not like a huge Star Wars nerd. I'm looking forward to the movies, but it's like I explore like the tent poles, but I don't like delve
You're
into
a dabbler.
Yeah, I'm a dilettante.
You're a Padawan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Darth Dabbler over there. What about you, Jack?
I did not like this story.
okay.
I'm gonna be one of those.
One
on this
of
podcast.
those.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna preface this episode with just one giant. I'm so sorry.
Great. Exactly what we're looking for. I overall liked it. I liked the gameplay a lot. I think the story, there were parts of the story that I liked. There are other aspects that I don't, which we talked a little on the podcast about it, but I'm sure we will go into more detail here. Want to start with a rundown of the characters, maybe? Who we liked, who we didn't?
Yeah. Fava, you famously very much are into Cal Kestis, the main character.
Yes.
Who has a whirlwind of emotions, always a very clearly defined character who isn't always a character who basically has things happen to them all the time.
And which was kind of my big complaint. I saw some comments afterwards, and the biggest defense that I saw of Cal was he's fine.
I mean,
He's a fine protagonist. And I guess, yes, that kind of sums him up in a nutshell of he's fine. He's just this bland gear in a larger cog that people are kind of pushing through, which is not how cogs work, but whatever.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could. I feel like even that flawed analogy is apt for Cal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. BD1, obviously the standout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of feels like every other character was more interesting and had a little bit more going on with them. And I think
Even BD1.
Even
and he's
BD1,
a robot.
yes.
He doesn't say anything.
yes, but he sacrificed his memory just to help the next person who is coming to figure out this myth that was left behind by
Weird puzzle. Why? What? Okay. Here's a question I have for both of you. What happened to that Jedi? It's kind of implied that he died in the Purge, but also we never really found out what happened to the mysterious figure that's been leading us this entire game with cryptic wording about how great the Zepho are.
Yeah. Did we?
I wonder if I don't know. Maybe they mentioned at the beginning, but yeah, it definitely by the end of it, because the game is as long as it is, it definitely feels like I was disconnected from the beginning. Like I'd completely forgotten about Prof, who you brought up earlier today. Of like, oh yeah, that was like a character that I was really into before they kill him in the first act. But by the end of it, like I was kind of like on the ride and not really thinking about a lot of the incidental parts of the story. So I enjoyed it for that, but I don't know that, as someone who's not a big Star Wars nerd, I imagine that like people would have a lot of like, well, this doesn't work this way, this doesn't work this way. But yeah, in terms of like who that guy is, I guess I just at some point accepted like, oh, he's kind of like the MacGuffin who's kind of taking you wherever the game wants you to go.
It's very much he's going to show up in visions to kind of lay out the breadcrumbs that you're following.
But it becomes really important at the end because he's the one who put together the information that's in that holocron, right? So what happens to him is super important because he knows where all of those kids are.
Yeah, it just seems it seems implied that he died as part of Order 66, but if that's not the case, then it is very important because like even if he was killed by that, like you would think Vader would know that he knows, or
he
like
probably just evaporated into his robes like all the great Jedi masters.
he's like peace him out, and then
yeah, his part of the story's done. And so the story takes place between episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah,
after the Empire has fallen, but is still around.
Well, no,
after the Jedi
Republic
are eliminated,
Yes.
but the Empire's still around.
Yes,
Right.
correct. Yeah. And Cal was a Padawan who kind of survived the culling
Yeah.
and ended up on a scrapper planet working as a scrapper, right? With his friend Prof. Yes.
So this is where I just want to have a little bit of a gripe, and I'm going to have a lot of little gripes, but I really wish the game had shown us how he lives, like kind of have that Force Awakens moment where we kind of get a walkthrough of like his day. Like I wanted to see where he lives, like what does he eat?
Well, he runs around on that.
Yeah, on the very precariously built junkyard that he works
Which
in
is
and
apparently
ships
what
and
they
stuff.
do every day.
Yeah, so it's like, oh yeah, go do this thing. It's like, cool, I'll just run this elaborate obstacle course to get to where I'm supposed to go. But yeah, when you were talking about like, oh yeah, he's this guy who just happens to be here on the Scrapper planet, it made me realize that I think Cal is basically like a fusion of Luke Skywalker's and Rey's backstories put together, where he's like, oh, he's a guy who just randomly is very important to the Force, and like also just completely abandons his past in order to become a Jedi. But the whole scrapper and junk, like, oh, I'm very good with my hands. I can build this stuff. Like that is basically what Rey and Luke did. So I don't know if that was obviously intentional, but he seems like they are trying to pitch him as like, here's a Star Wars protagonist, which I don't think like even Starkiller really was that in Force Unleashed, if we're comparing him to other Star Wars video game protagonists.
Yeah.
And it feels like, from my understanding, not that I've played most of these, it feels like a lot of the Star Wars games feel like they go out of their way to not explicitly be that. You know, you have like being a TIE fighter or like having the non-standard roles kind of be a huge part of the experience, you know, things like Corridor and stuff. But this feels like they are very much pitching it as like, this is a big new franchise with what you've established as the main character of a Star Wars story in the lead role, not like a side story, which was interesting to think about as you know, they're trying to make Star Wars more than that series of films, right? With stuff like The Mandalorian and this. So this feels like very much them pitching like, hey, be very invested in this. But like you said, the fact that Cal is my least favorite character kind of speaks to like whether or not they succeeded at that.
Yeah, and one of the things that goes along with that is I do feel like other characters kind of had interesting backstories, but it feels like with Cal, we just know that he's been living on this planet, which I didn't really get a sense of how long he had been there until we get the flashbacks where you see, he was a little kid before. But it also feels like his backstory is rooted in this event that Star Wars fans know so well that it doesn't really feel personal to him. It's just like, oh yeah, he was a Padawan, so he survived the culling of all the Padawans, and we kind of know that. It doesn't feel personal in the way that Sears did, where it's like, okay, you know, she was captured. She had this apprentice she was trying to hide. She got tortured and finally gave up that apprentice's name. And then she tapped into the dark side in order to kill all of her captives and escape. You know, that feels more personal and more interesting and more unique in a way that it's just, okay, another one survived the culling, you know.
Well, and that's another thing. A lot of the flashbacks are kind of presented almost as reveals, like especially like the big one where you finally see kind of the full story of what happened during the Purge. But it's we kind of already knew that that's what happened. So I was kind of like, well, why didn't this start off the game? You know, as opposed to
why is this like the third act revelation of like, oh yeah, by the way, the thing that we explicitly told you happened, that happens,
and it's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
like there's no real twist to it or anything.
Yeah, and that's kind of the issue that I've had with movies like Rogue One too, where it's like, well, we know where this is going to end, right? And even chasing that the holocron the entire game, it's like, well, we know that doesn't just get out there and everyone's going to all of a sudden know that there are all these Jedis that would have changed, the events of Episode 4 and things like that.
Well, I think that's where this was sort of a missed opportunity, because when you know the end point, then that makes the journey much more important. And that means they could have gone just like off the wall crazy with the journey, but we get we only get that in like the side characters and supporting characters, and it's just kind of like, why isn't that the main? Why aren't you making Cere's story like the main story?
Right.
Here?
Like I don't have a problem with like, hey, you already know how this ends, as long as like the lead up there has some interesting stories along the way. Like that, those are all just like the fact that, hey, we're gonna establish this thing that you already knew happened. That is fine as long as it's a vehicle for like an interesting story. And I feel like you're right. It just feels like they're using Cal, his story, to touch on a bunch of more interesting stories that I would have rather have been the centerpiece, like Cere's story, Trilla's story, Marin's story, even like later on. I feel like I was more invested in those characters and how they developed more than I was with Cal, because it doesn't seem like he learned, like his big revelation is, oh, I know what your story's about. It's not like I suddenly had a coming of age story of my own where it's like, okay, now I've learned a lesson about what it means to be a Jedi, or like, I've grown as a person. Here's this thing that I believe that suddenly comes into question. Like that is the arc that they give to Cere, and like,
right.
And the sort of like, hey, not all Jedi are bad or whatever. That's the story they give to Marin, and like, here's someone who was at who basically gave into the dark side, and at the end has like, right before she dies, she has this big turnaround moment. Like that is the story they give to Trilla. So all the other characters around Cal get the big moments that I think would have been better served as like the main crux of the story, whether or not Cal was at the center of it or not.
Yeah, and I guess I think what really would have improved Cal's story is if the game allowed him moments to breathe and process a lot of the things that happened to him. Like, so going back to the beginning here to kind of get us back on track as we're moving through this story, we were talking about Prauf, and Prauf is set up as kind of his surrogate father figure who's like taken him under his wing for like the last 5 years-ish, I think. And Prauf like puts his life on the line to try and defend Cal and gets killed for it, and is literally never mentioned again in the entire game.
Yeah.
Cal like maybe has like 2 seconds total to like process that Prauf died. He's never brought up again. And it just felt like there needed to be more callbacks to things like that, where like, yeah, he survived the purge, but also like that's like the first time, like, I mean, or second time. It should be like a really scarring event for him that like he keeps coming back to, like almost like the kid from Mass Effect 3. Like something that haunts him. I guess.
Yeah, like it would have been, I think, part of his larger arc as a character to say like, hey, here are the people who have made sacrifices to make sure that I have this moment to find the holocron, to be a Jedi, because like, Prauf understands how important it is for there to be Jedi. But he, like, when people make those sacrifices for him, like Saul Guerrero later on, and kind of like a lot of his troops and stuff, like when they make sacrifices, it just feels like they never really linger on the effects of those sacrifices or how meaningful they are. It just seems like Cal's like either like, man, that was a bummer, or like, hey, thanks for the help, guys. Like that is his reaction. He there aren't a lot of moments where he just kind of, like you said, takes the moment in and says like, okay, here's more motivation to do what I've been doing, is because these people helped me get through it. I don't want their sacrifices to be in vain.
He needed to play that space guitar more.
That's right.
And write some songs about what he was going through.
Oh, that's right. That would have been really cool, actually.
If every time you went back to the ship, you just played a little more
I
guitar.
don't know, Jack. I did not like that space guitar scene.
But it literally never came. Like, that's another thing. Like, they're just little things that never come up again. It's like, build on something. Like, even if it's like, here's something I've mentioned before. Like, I like Greaser more than I like Cal, and Greaser probably isn't like the top tier character in this game. Like, he's just the pilot of the ship, but you like by the end of the game you understand where he's coming from. Like,
is his name Greaser?
Yeah.
Grease or Greaser.
Grease, something like that.
Yeah.
But like you know that he has interests outside of flying his ship. Like he has flaws, and he's just like an interesting kind of fun character.
Yeah, he's very much comic relief, but also kind of relatable, and his personality stands out in a way that
he's like the only one on the crew who like ties the people down to like normal. He's like the closest you get to like a straight man.
He's into gardening too.
But that's the thing. Like you're collecting things throughout the game, but they aren't for Cal. They're for Greaser or Grease. Like, what does Cal like to do? Like what
are his interests?
What are his
Besides playing
interests?
guitar,
Tinkering with his lightsaber.
He's had
I guess
5 years
to develop
something
interests,
outside of Jedi, and like the only thing we learn is that he really loves being a Jedi. And that's really that's cool, but like what else? What more is there to him?
Yeah, I think it's telling that to me, Cal was at his most interesting after Trilla hacks his communicator and is basically becomes like the BioShock-esque, like, well, now you're gonna have to do this, but also I'm a bad person, right? So like my favorite part of Cal is how he bounces off of other people, like the way he acts as a vehicle for Trilla to be like super menacing, and the way like he acts as a redemptive, like someone who helps Cere find her redemptive arc. And I think, I think maybe they wanted to lean in on the stories to give those kinds of side stories a little bit more spotlight. But I think overall, his character suffers as a result, I think, and because he is the main character, and they don't play him off as like, oh, here's your avatar in the world. I think this is like one of the, maybe, like, I'm not a proponent of it, but like one of the strongest arguments for like why the protagonist should be silent or whatever, because it's like, oh, just focus on other people's stories. Whereas in this one, I feel like they tried to give him a story, but it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, it's kind of generic enough that he can still kind of be that vessel, but everyone else ends up feeling more interesting because they're a little more personal and unique.
Yeah, but I think the flip side of that is that I really enjoyed those other stories, like the stories that they tend to focus on as you're kind of, as Cal, you're kind of touring just all these different planets. I think the fact that they focus on that, I think, is ultimately to the game's benefit, because if they had gone so hard in on the like, hey, this guy suffered through Order 66 and came out of it alive, and like the trauma that might have caused, I think it would have been a worse story than if like, hey, here's a really interesting character, we're going to explore their backstory. Here's, Trilla, here's Marin, like here are all these ancillary characters that we're going to explore. I think the fact that the game does focus on them, I think, is the saving grace here of like, because it makes a lot of later moments pay off. So Cal doesn't have to do the heavy lifting because he can't.
So here's a question. How did they find him so fast at the beginning? Like, he literally used it and he didn't have time to he uses the Force to save Prauf.
Yeah.
And like, he doesn't even have time to get home before the Inquisitors like are there.
Yeah, I think at some point Trilla says like, maybe it's like in reference to something else, but I remember her saying like, oh yeah, we've been watching you. But I don't know if that's in reference to like, oh, we kind of already had a sneaking suspicion that someone in this area was a Jedi. Okay. Or if it's like, since you did that and we found you and we've been chasing you, we've been watching you. Okay. So I think maybe that is an allusion to like, we kind of suspected that there had been Jedi activity near here, or we had a lead, and you kind of just confirmed it for us, and we were to strike.
It's a little Star Wars
but
magic.
It is, yeah.
It's like every time someone lands on a planet, they're like 5 miles away from like the most important thing on that planet.
Like the fact that like,
I just happened to bump into Yoda. Well, that's fortuitous. That's the Force guiding everyone together.
Yeah.
Whatever. That is what it is. But Trilla as a villain, what'd you guys think? And she's introduced in like maybe the first third of the story.
Yeah, I mean, she's like the person who kills Prof, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So she's introduced much earlier, but you face off against her in kind of the first pseudo boss battle, which you're destined to lose.
Yeah.
Which those to me are always, they kind of get to me, and they're kind of frustrating, but I guess I didn't mind it here too much.
Yeah, I think it's mostly because I think you don't waste any resources really when you're fighting them. I mean, you have like the stim stuff, but it's like that's a renewable resource that you come by pretty quickly. It's if there were items, like if this was an RPG and it's like, okay, I need to win this fight. This guy's really giving me a tough time because I'm not supposed to win. So I use up all my elixirs on this guy. And then suddenly, all right, well, I guess I wasn't supposed to win that. So I just wasted all my items. You don't have that here. So when I did end up like, oh, I got this person to Half-Life and now they're going to execute the cutscene, right? Like I didn't mind those moments, but there was like, and I like that they happened with Trilla because, you know, she's like the main character. Obviously you don't want to fight her, and I kind of knew that it was going to happen. I'm not going to kill her here, right?
Yeah.
You kind of get that feeling every time you go into one of those battles so early. It's
Like,
someone's escaping, or
you're not going to kill her this early. So
So it felt like, especially as the game progressed, that there was kind of a mix-up between which characters should have which arcs. Because I know Cere's arc is kind of like a fan favorite from what I've just been seeing on the internets. But I really felt like Trilla should have had her arc. Like that.
It should have been a stronger through line, I think.
Well, no. So if I were going to like move things around a little bit, right? I would have given Cere's arc to Trilla. So like by the end of the game, it's not Cere who is standing up to the big bad. It's Trilla. Like that's kind of her like turn of heart. Like giving her the chance to like act, right?
Yeah.
On that. And honestly, I probably would have removed the Rogue One introduction of
oh, come on, Jack.
What's his butt? I don't know if we're gonna get there yet, so I'm saving that.
I guess we can wait a little.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. But I will say, like, one thing I do like about Trilla's arc is that she has that turnaround, like right at the end, right before she dies.
Right.
I think that's a really good moment of like, say, or what was her line? Like, save us or something like. Redeem or avenge us.
Yeah, avenge us.
Something like that right before she's like cut down by Darth Vader. I think that's a good moment of like her realizing in the moment that it's like, oh, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah.
Like even though like I'm a bad guy, she had been harboring like either doubts or like had come to realize like, oh, okay, I'm the bad guy or whatever.
Right.
Like, but she was kind of very aware of it before then. But it's like she kind of came to reckon with the full implications of what she'd done right before she died. And I think I didn't get the chance to fight this guy. Like you guys have to do it. Like the fact that she turns around right at the end there, I think is a really strong moment.
I think that is a strong moment. But I would have replaced the big
Cere?
bad. No, I would have had Cere not even be like involved, like take on kind of like almost like the same role that Ghost Obi-Wan had in the main series, where he's just like kind of a guiding figure. She's kind of injecting that doubt about like, you know, light side, dark side, but she's like, you know, she can't get over that trauma or whatever because it broke her, right? I think that would have made her maybe even more interesting. Like if she doesn't, like, it doesn't end with all of them being like fine, right? And I would have replaced the big bad with the fallen Jedi from earlier, because he was super interesting, and then we just ended his story like right there. Like have him get away, have him come back at the end as like for his revenge for Order 66.
His
like,
arc was definitely like one of the more like the least developed, where it's just like here's a random guy you meet on this planet. He happens to have like this whole thing that's going to get Marin on your side eventually. But his arc was definitely like it felt like the standard Cohen kind of like, let's have this little side side excursion into this storyline, but ultimately it doesn't really matter.
Right, but like I feel like that would have fixed so many problems, because then you have a villain that you have history with in the main narrative already, and you have a reason for Marin to be there, because she really didn't do much after she joined your crew. Like, she made the ship invisible.
Hey, she could make those platforms left it. That was really cool though.
That was cool.
Yeah, she kind of acts as like the Deus Ex Machina at various points of like, I'm gonna add my magic. She was an interesting character, but
I wanted more from her.
Yeah,
that was my thing.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of characters, where it's like, okay, this person's interesting. Let's learn more about them. But the whole going back to Trilla, I guess she is an interesting character, and I like that her and even the ninth sister, who is kind of that goofy giant,
yellow giant.
They're all. It's interesting that all of the bad characters are grappling with their badness in the same way that, you know, we've seen with good characters kind of grappling with not turning to the dark side. And I guess they kind of did that with Kylo Ren too in The Force Awakens, where that's the first time I've kind of gotten the sense that, like, oh yeah, the bad guys aren't just super evil. I mean, I guess, you know, obviously Darth Vader and things like that have done that. But it was the first time I've seen it as a struggle to maintain the dark force because you have these other good qualities inside of you.
It's a story about conviction, you know, whether you're good or bad. It's like if you're good, the conviction to not have that temptation, you know, take you over. And if you're the bad guy, the conviction to say, like, no, I'm going to do whatever I can to get more power, and what that actually means for the bad guys, who are not Sith. As far like I thought that there was like the whole Sith thing where there could only be two Sith, a master and apprentice, but these people also know.
Well, they're Inquisitors.
Oh, so they're
which
just
I guess is different.
They're bad Jedi, not Sith. Is that?
I don't think.
Or are the Sith bad Jedi?
I think Inquisitors are set up as being like they are not Jedi and they are not Sith, but they are clearly aligned with the dark side. It's kind of like where Marin uses Force powers, but it's not really considered the Force.
Yeah. I don't know that
they explained it. They called it. Marin uses magic.
Okay, but it's not the Force isn't magic, and the Force is real.
Right, but that's why this is she uses an offshoot of the Force called magic.
Okay.
That they call magic.
Sure.
So now there's literally magic in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. But the whole reveal of Trilla also just felt, you know, very well-worn territory of like, oh yeah, okay, the bad person used to be a good person. Like We've seen that many times.
You could say it's the crux of an entire movie series.
Yes. but still an effective character, I felt.
Yeah.
Overall.
Like I said, I think her best moments are when she's like kind of goading Cal into fighting her and kind of leading him along and saying like, I'm going to like basically tell you where to go, but you're not going to stop me.
And that was one place where I felt that Cal's incompetence worked for me, you know, where it's like, I appreciate the fact, that you're this character that continually runs into characters that you just can't stand up to. You know, like you're not skilled enough, especially at that point, and towards the end, you know, not ever, where you're on this magical fantasy to be a hero, but you keep on running into characters who are just playing better than you.
Yeah, who are kicking your ass all the time.
Yeah, like that's for me, like that's where I really appreciated the gameplay. Is how it built on that narrative bedrock of, you know, you aren't good enough and, you know, but you're going to keep trying.
Fits right in with the Dark Souls formula.
Yeah, that's why I was messing up all those parries against it. Like, I think she does have like one of the hardest attacks to parry, where she kind of has a staccato rhythm to her attacks that basically kind of force you to, instead of parry, to just hold block and say like, I'm gonna have to endure this, not deflect it. And I think that's, I mean, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but like it does feel like she's the character who gives you the most trouble, or at least like that last boss battle was the hardest the game ever got for me.
Yeah, same.
I think in terms of like actual bosses, and not like here's an encounter with 40 people that are just gonna like you just mow down, but it's just a trial of endurance.
I do have to say, I think it's really interesting that the dark side characters in this game seem, like you were saying, way more in touch with like their own trauma than even Cal or Cere. Like both Cal and Cere are just kind of like running away from their traumas. The dark side characters are like, yeah, we're traumatized. Like we know that. Like we're broken. It's just kind of like that. That's really interesting to me, and I'm very curious like why that narrative choice was made, because it seems like being aware of your trauma would help you get over it.
Yeah,
right?
It's also kind of a bummer because they give the most characterization to the two people they end up killing the fastest.
Yeah, and they're both kind of willing to criticize what they've gone through under the Empire too, in a way that's you know, they both just bring it right out, like we were tortured and made into these people, you know, like made into these monsters.
Yeah, and then at the end they're just gonna like, well, it's a living, so like I'm a bad guy now.
Well, it seems like the main difference between our dark side characters and our light side characters is that the dark side characters have just given up hope of being able to change that system, and so they've just kind of sold out to the man, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
You know, if I can't stand up to them, might as well join them, right?
These people are stronger, so I'm siding with them.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and you should come with us.
Resistance is futile.
Yes. Yeah. Marin is another character, and the entirety of going to Dathomir, which I didn't really. It took me a while to connect with Darth Maul.
Yeah.
You know, as a Knight brother, like I wasn't all. I'm sure other people saw that and was like, "Oh, we're going to, you know,
the Knight Brothers,
the
or
Knight
whatever.
Brother planets, and
Yeah.
we're gonna learn more about this." But
I've read that wiki page. I know what these are.
but that was all interesting to me to see, and it was interesting to go. I don't know what order planets you guys went to, but I think I jumped to that one before I went to Kashyyyk, I think, and it was like, oh, this is a bad place. I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Like, it is very dangerous.
I think along with you kind of being representative of my issues with that, the way that game wants to be an open world and kind of very open ended, the fact that Dathomir is basically like I don't recommend anyone go to Dathomir first. You basically just. I think the proper path is to just do Zepho and then go to Dathomir when you have to, because it's not really like it's not an
You don't
either
really
or
get
situation.
anything cool out
Right.
of going there early.
It's not like it's not like in Dark Souls where you can take the catacombs and it's like way harder than going up the first ladder basically. But you can eventually get to Valley of Dragons and then go to the Blighttown. Here, there's a hard stop where they're like, come back later.
Yeah.
But it also I think works to the story's detriment, because I met Marin and she was like, oh. Like, I'm here, try to stop me, and then you're introduced to the character, and then you're like, all right, we'll come back for you later. So that made her whole arc feel really distant. It's like, is she going to come up in any part of the rest of the story? And it turns out, no, her entire story is self-contained, and that made it very weirdly paced and delivered, because I went to Dathomir, went to Zepho, and then did more globetrotting, and then went back to Dathomir.
I do have to say, Dathomir is probably one of the more tonally confusing parts of Jedi Fallen Order, just because it's really hard for me to pinpoint what the difference is between Cal and the Fallen Jedi that you fight there, because you both basically do the same thing. Like, Cal just runs through their town and kills a ton of them.
Yeah, they make a big deal of him having all these horns or teeth or whatever that is, and it's like, I've killed a lot of people, and then by the time you get to him, so have you.
And they very explicitly are like, hey, don't come here, please, 10 times.
Yeah.
And Cal's just like, nah, I'm coming.
Oh, but you don't understand. I need your artifact.
I need to take something from. I'm here to
Once I
take
get
something
that,
from
I'm going to
you.
leave. Yeah.
Yeah. But then Marin decides oh, you're good because you threw your lightsaber at me and kind of left yourself open. But I could have killed you, but I decided not to.
Right.
A good person would always do that, right?
Yeah, I guess you take what you can get at that point when you have this jerk fallen Jedi who's been
I also wonder
causing trouble the whole time.
To what degree Marin Stark was just like, I'm just tired. That was kind of her arc. It's like, I've been waiting for a way to avenge my sisters, and either that's not going to come or I'm tired of waiting for it. Whatever. I guess you're fine. We can leave.
Yeah, but I did not see that turn for her character coming.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it is more. I guess I expect Star Wars stories to be a little more black and white than that, and so once you're established as a bad person, unless you're doing a flip at the very end where you're going to martyr yourself.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting. They had some interesting interactions between Cal and Marin, where it's like they kind of just talk things through in a way that you don't really expect in these stories. And that was another situation where I found Cal okay. And it was kind of interesting that he could come into these situations, and if nothing else, he's an honest character, I guess you could say. And having him kind of talk his way through, maybe honest or naive, he feels a lot of the time to his own detriment.
He's very trusting.
But in that case, it was kind of nice how they they walk through it, and then when it got to the end, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna come with you guys. It was like, okay, I'd like to see more of this character.
Yeah.
You know.
And then she's never brought up again.
And then she's just kind of sitting on the couch in the.
I guess
ship.
I could help you guys raid the Inquisitor compound, but I'll wait till the end. Whatever.
Okay, I really wanted more things to come together at the end when they raided the Inquisitor compound. Like, you already established that Saw Gerrera's in this game as like a rebel leader who's like super willing to go, balls to the wall against the Empire.
And has been directly harmed by the Inquisitors, right? Like the Inquisitors are like attacking this area, so you would think that Saw would want, like, no, I want a piece of that. I want to get in and destroy the Inquisitors with you.
Yeah, I wanted this to be like kind of the thing where that brought all of those seemingly disparate elements throughout Fallen Order back together. Like, why is Ciri why is what's her name? The Night Witch. Merrin. Why is Merrin on the ship at the end?
She's just passively, quietly, like, waiting on the ship for something to happen and need her help. Yeah.
Right. Like, it seemed like this should have been the thing where everyone got involved.
Yeah, it should have been an Outer Worlds style. Like, everyone is here to all the allegiances you built up along the way by helping people. Like, here are all of those things coming to bear. And I think that is like the ending that I think would have been a lot stronger. But also like the fact that it takes place underwater is kind of weird. I guess I didn't expect that, but
yeah,
it kind of dulls the impact of that. Like, of there just being a lot of very quiet ships all raiding the same. Somewhat tiny compound.
It seems like it would have been a useful thing to have someone who can literally raise zombies from the dead on your side.
I also, to go back to the moment where she's introduced to the rest of the ship, it definitely seems like Cal is certainly more trusting because he's like, he's a main character. But like the fact that Ciri and Grease do not quite, like, they're kind of like, are you sure about this? And then it takes like one, are you sure? To be like, all right, this person who can raise the dead and has been shown to have manipulative powers. There's no possibility that she could be like manipulating him in any way. Sure, you're totally cool to be on our ship.
Well, if you're okay in Cal's book, because Cal has proven himself such an outstanding hero and
he
leader.
He has a great track record.
Yeah, he's a good trusted character for sure.
Yeah. One random thing, very random in terms of the gameplay that I wanted to touch on was you get knocked out by a bounty hunter, and then you end up in an arena.
Yeah, I don't know. That has to be a scripted moment, right? Because it is so involved at this point. But I went back and eventually, what is it? The droid hunter, I think, is the person who does that. And then you can eventually go out and find them. I don't know if it's like random or if there's a specific location.
It seems like a whole class of somewhat unique characters that will just show up at different places that you have been to, which was interesting to me because they are kind of mini boss fights that they just ambush you with at certain times. But I do wonder if you could have actually gotten through that fight, because I was pretty close to beating them, but then I failed on my own accord. And so I don't know if that was completely scripted or if it's just the first time that one of those groups manages to beat you.
I think you are forced to lose that fight because I think I was doing like you. I was doing really well, and then eventually they throw out like a bomb that stuns you for way longer than I think bombs are able to in that game, and then they just capture you after that. So I think you are meant to lose that first fight. But yeah, it was an interesting thing. I don't know if it's like as procedural or like emergent as like the Pursuer in Dark Souls 2, but like I did like running into them at like very inconvenient moments, and it was funny because like the one time I did kill one, I killed the like the spotter or whatever, like the person who's shooting you, and then the robot somehow like I just turned around and was running away from him, and then he just died. So I don't know if he ran because there was like this electrified like pillar next to him, and maybe he just ran into the pillar and died or something. But those fights are always very like the fact that there is this random character chasing you, I think is really cool. But I don't know if it didn't feel like this huge like I'm always on the lookout for droids. It just feels like I was never seeking them out because they don't really give you anything. But it was a nice moment when those things happen.
On my 10th time running through this sequence to get back to where I need to go.
Exactly.
All of a sudden there's a surprise there.
Yeah.
And the actual like the arena battle, which you're there because of Grease's gambling debts, right?
Yeah.
And it was just a very weird, you get into that arena, which isn't that out there for a Star Wars game where,
No.
Luke had to fight the giant monster.
Rancor.
Yes, Rancor. Thank you. And so that's kind of what I was expecting going into it. And then it's like there's rock music playing, you know, and there's an announcer.
I think it's actually the rock music he's listening to at the very beginning of the game.
Is it?
I think so.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But that, and then it just kind of turns into a wave-based kind of.
And then it kind of just ends, it feels like, because it feels like here, okay, you've beaten the last boss. They're like, oh, we're going to send more for you. And then the ship just basically comes in and kind of just takes you away. And it feels like it's just like no questions asked. The guy's just like, oh, that's a bummer that they took him. Oh, well. Like, there's not like that sequence feels like it's cut short. You know, like they just leave and that's that. We've successfully paid off Grease's debts.
Yeah. Once again, they just kind of fly in and you hop on the ship and you're out of there.
Yeah.
Right.
Happens a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the ending. I wanted a lot of these disparate elements to come back and have like consequences.
Yeah.
And they just didn't seem to have many of those.
I think part of it does have to do with the game's structure is like like a game that really wants to make you feel like, oh, I could go anywhere and tackle these things in different orders, but it is really just like it is a linear game in the sense that you are tackling, you go here and then you go here and then you go here, but there is this element of, well, you could go somewhere else, but you really can't. And I think that is what makes the storytelling a little bit slapshod and occasionally prevents them from being as thorough about bringing all those fruits to bear because you have to tackle them out of order. So it feels like I do think that this game would have been better served if it had stuck to its guns and said, like, you explore one planet at a time, and then you can explore the planet at your leisure, and then you leave at the set point, and then we take you to the next planet. So like the fact that that at several points it tells you like, hey, here's this thing you can go backtrack for, and then you go in and there's a whole new area. I don't think those areas work as well because they almost feel like that moment where you're doing side quests and it's like, well, I have to save the world. Like the world is falling apart if I don't immediately tackle this quest. Why am I off on this side quest? So I think it would have been better served as like giving you that momentum by pushing you forward constantly. Like the most important thing you can do is just continue the main quest, but you can explore the tunnels along the way to find secrets and stuff. I think that's one of my biggest issues with the game.
I don't mind going back to and unlocking those little pockets every now and then. It would be like, oh, there's this whole other area that I wasn't expecting. But you could have certainly sent someone to a planet, have them do that kind of big main chunk which gives you the story part, and then just kind of tacitly know, okay, if I go back to that planet, like I'm gonna be able to explore more stuff and find more lightsaber parts or whatever, but it's not going to be advancing the story.
Because ultimately, like, they force the backtracking because it feels forced, right? Because you go in and here's like, you go to Zephyr for the first time, and then there's that one section with like the vines that you can't jump because you have to bring them to you, and it's like, oh, I can't do this here. And instead of saying like if you are aware enough to remember, oh, there were those vines on this planet, I can get this extra bonus. It's more like, no, this is a story thing that you have to come back to later once you have this power, and we're going to push you there. So it doesn't actually feel like backtracking. It just feels like they've just kind of closed this area of the theme park until later. Because there isn't a point where you're going to get it early or anything like that. It is part of the story progression. So you come back there the moment they tell you to, right? So it doesn't feel as like I'm doing this of my own accord. It feels more like now this is the part. Now I have unlocked access to the next part of the story. So like I think like again maybe for me it would have been better served if they had been a little bit more guided with the little spokes along the way. Yeah,
sure. And I guess we should just talk about the ending at this point, right? So you go into the, what do you call it?
Inquisitor base?
Yes, the Inquisitor base, and you're facing off against Trilla.
Right. Because, I mean, to set up a little bit of context here, you basically you're trying to find the holocron, and when you do, you have like this vision of what would happen if you did the thing that you wanted, which was, you use that list to find and raise a whole new generation of Jedi, and you're kind of told by the Zepho sage of like, oh, well, if this happens, Trilla is eventually going to use it against you and basically turn you into a bad guy by saying like, hey, either you surrender to me or I kill all these Padawan. And so that's sort of when he has this revelation of like, I should destroy the holocron when I get it. But by that point, Trilla has taken the holocron.
So my question is, specifically about that vision. I'm kind of confused at how Jedi visions are supposed to work in Fallen Order, because it didn't seem like that seemed like one possibility.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because that's not actually what is going to happen, obviously, because we know what the end of the game is. So, like, I guess I didn't know to what degree we should be trusting that weird vision was accurate.
I mean, I guess my response would be like, it's to him, I would imagine it's kind of irrelevant. Like the fact that this could happen, I think is enough to stop him from like, okay, if there's whether or not it's a reliable vision, the fact that this could happen seems convincing enough because I experienced it so vividly that I'm convinced by the vision, regardless of whether or not it would actually come to bear.
Okay.
But it's hard, like I'm not a Star Wars expert, so I don't know if like Zepho Sage predictions are like law.
Right.
So
here's my thing is that we know from just the base experience that Cal had that someone who just uses a force power is going to get found like within a couple hours from what this game has set up.
Yeah.
And kids don't
know. It's not a
know.
foolproof plan, for
Kids don't know any better.
Yeah.
So what happens when they start actually exhibiting this in some sort of even mildly public way?
Yeah.
It's not a bulletproof plan, to be sure.
Is it a plan?
Yeah,
That's too much logic, Jack, for Star Wars.
We should probably just get into it.
Well, I think it's more about like tying into the themes of like all these people were kind of coerced into their line of work, basically. Like Cal was trained from the beginning to be a Jedi, as was the case in the first 3 episodes, and then Trilla was raised to be a Jedi and then forced to be an Inquisitor. Sierra was kind of on the path of like raising these people, so she was kind of involved in that. So the running theme here is like people don't choose this lifestyle, right? One way or the other, they don't get to choose. And I think that Cal's goal is to have them choose. But saying like I want to make sure that they choose is kind of like this weird offloading of responsibility, because if he is choosing not to intervene when others would certainly love to intervene. So it is kind of a faulty, like his whole turn is based on a little bit of a faulty premise.
Right.
Because the Empire is certainly going to go after those people.
Right.
But like in the moment, it's like, okay, it's a nice thematic touch, even if it doesn't make perfect logical sense.
Right.
But yeah, so that he has that vision, and he's like, okay, she has the holocron, so now we need to go do that, and then you get Marin on your side, and so you're in the compound.
I did want to say that it was a really nice touch to have his special like force touching ability come back around when she like throws her lightsaber at him and he catches it. And then he just like gets disabled by like her trauma.
Yeah.
That was a nice touch.
Is that a thing in Star Wars? Like people, if you touch someone else's lightsaber, you learn their life story?
I think that's just an offshoot of his
yeah.
ability to touch stuff. And
yeah, I don't think he really. It's kind of like a rogue from X-Men type power.
Okay.
It seems like he doesn't really have control over whether or not.
So that's
he
unique
feels
to Cal.
something.
That's not necessarily like.
It's not common at the very least.
I think they said something along those lines of. I think Seer did that. You know, like not many Jedi have that power, but I think it is an established power that some do.
Yeah.
Okay. So so that was and I think it works as an in context way to tell you her backstory, which is like because otherwise, when are you going to have time for that?
Yeah.
Because it would have been super hokey for her to be like, well, here's why I'm a bad guy. Like,
time to monologue.
Yeah.
Screen wipe. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that she kind of just very tacitly acknowledges like, oh, well, you're busy with that. I'm going to take this. So that was a really cool. I don't know if she knew, right? But the fact that she is as resourceful to say like, oh, this guy's incapacitated right now. You can have my lightsaber.
Yeah, literally the experience that I've been through is enough to completely disable you.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to
later. I think that the game starts really strong, and I think it ends really strong, and then it has a middle chapter where it has to be a video game, and I think for the most part it's fine. Like narratively, I think it's fine narratively, and then it ends I think pretty strong, even if there are kind of like the usual kind of concessions of logic that come with like a Star Wars story.
Yeah. So we get to the end. We're in the Inquisitor base, and you fight Trilla. Also, there's like a weird throwaway line where like Cal observes that like the base is way more advanced than the Empire has usually, and they don't really explain that ever.
Which stuck out to me too, because it's like they've been making ships the size of moons for like how long, you know?
Yeah, but underwater, man, that's
impossible.
that's next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you fight Trilla. You're kind of like about to win / you have won, and you're like, she's having kind of a change of heart moment. And then Darth Vader shows
Cal
up.
works his magic again, you know, kind of talking people through
being a
things.
lovable doof.
And gets there, and then she just freezes as Darth Vader shows up. And you didn't like that?
I mean, it was cool, but also at the same time, they did zero like groundwork to even like hint that Darth Vader was at all involved in this.
Is it implied that this is like his first reveal as Darth Vader? Because before this, like, I mean, the end of episode 3 is him becoming Darth Vader, right? So like, obviously, maybe it's not his first public appearance or anything, but is this supposed to be his first outing as Darth Vader?
I don't think so. They didn't give us any context for Darth Vader
They don't hint
here.
at his appearance at all, for sure.
So maybe it is, but also it's very likely that it's not.
It's weird because they established...
It's been 5 years.
I don't know how established the Inquisitors are as an entity in the Star Wars universe, but even in just a throwaway line of like, oh yeah, Darth Vader's kind of involved. He's like executive producing the Inquisitors.
Or even like in the Trilla vision,
For
you
her
get
to
while
you
touch the
so
lightsaber.
like, you're
some
very
hint.
powerful, Trilla. Like just some involvement from him that didn't have to say, oh, by the way, Darth Vader's in this game.
Right.
I
maybe
think,
he's the one who tortured, or maybe
Right.
Seer has. Maybe he's the one who tortured Seer. Like something.
But
like
even
that.
then, like seeing Darth Vader was like, I was very back and forth. I was like, is this corny? Is this really like? Is this dumb? But ultimately, it's like, oh, this is like a really cool render of Darth Vader for whatever reason.
Yeah,
He's like,
he's
as imposing. It's not, you don't fight Darth Vader, which I like. I like that it's not like he has a health bar, and if you were good enough at the game, you could beat Darth Vader this early.
I think they just wanted that big surprise for his reveal. And it goes back to, I always have the criticism of kind of the new age of Star Wars where it's like, just give me new stories. Like don't keep going back to the same stuff that I already know and all the little references back to these things.
Right.
But at the same time, as soon as he showed up, man, I perked up so much. It's like, oh, Darth Vader's here. And then he becomes like this Michael Myers type of character of just like walking death that you have to escape.
Yeah, but at the same, like, I do like that there is some resistance from them though. That Seer does learn how to project the barrier, and then he is not like, he is that Michael Myers character, but they do manage to sort of curb his overwhelming force a little bit.
Yeah, they give you little respites along the way, which is another case of people intervening just to save Cal's life, which
is again questionable choice, but whatever.
But at the
He's
same
the main
time,
character.
at that point, it's another point where I can appreciate, your character is not the ultimate hero in this story, and he is vulnerable in a way that, sometimes you don't always
It's
get.
another point where I would have appreciated, again, all of the elements coming together at the end to assault the Inquisitor base, because then Darth Vader wading through all of the elements that you've put together over the course of this game would have been even cooler. Like, it would have made that reveal like even more relevant, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you could have had that moment without, have him killing Saw Gerrera or something. Or I don't know if it's been established that Saw Gerrera ever met Darth Vader before this or after. But you could have had that moment of him like, here's a moment for Darth Vader to show off how powerful Darth Vader is, where he's like, oh, all these people have come to help you, and it's like Darth Vader just kind of completely waves them off. I think would have been even more terrifying to say, like, this is why this guy was worth turning into a bad guy and saving and turning into an android.
Kind of like that moment at the end of Rogue One where like they're doing like a massive relay race with the data at the end.
I do like though that like BD1 does get his like second moment as like, here's my big life-saving thing where I'm going to hack Darth Vader. I think that was
which is absurd.
Yeah. But hey, he's like for a robot. It worked. It that leap is worth making, I think.
And I guess there is some retconning going on here where it's like, every time that Darth Vader shows up, in kind of these ancillary stories, he is always the ultimate powerhouse. But in episode 4, he doesn't have that level of power, and you have like random board members of the Empire like talking back to him and dismissing, his old magic, before he force chokes them to death or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's clear, like, there's that nostalgia factor of, okay, this is the bad guy in this universe.
Like, even in episode 4, it feels like, oh, this is MJ after he left the Bulls, and like all these like side stories are like, no, this is MJ in his prime. Like he is tearing this up.
Yeah.
Which is a cool, like, I like that they're able to have that happen in a way that doesn't diminish his impact in episode 4.
Well, so I think that's kind of like his almost retconning as like this terrifying figure has been something that is almost like a holdover from a lot of the people who saw the first Star Wars movie as a kid. Because I've been reading just like some old school reactions to the first Star Wars movie, and there was a time period before that second movie came out where people were basically treating Darth Vader as like this Michael Myers style scary villain. You know, he's a man all dressed in black who's like 6 feet tall, who's just going to choke you with his mind and then maybe cut you in half. You know, and so a lot of these new versions of that, I think, are just putting into practice a lot of those initial impressions.
Right, they're playing, like, Darth Vader has become the character that a lot of people imagined him to be.
Right.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy of, like, maybe he was, because, you know, by the end he's a tragic figure who's not as powerful as, like, he has led people to believe. But, you know, because we were like, when we were kids, we were like, oh, man, this guy's unstoppable.
Yeah.
Like, that is what a lot of the fiction has become about him, of, like, the man has become the myth through this fiction, right?
Exactly.
Which is, but, like, in effect, it is interesting because people react to him that way, you know, throughout episode 4. So this kind of plays into that in a way that I think is pretty compelling for his character and sets him up to fail much more, like, you know, devastatingly in the last few episodes.
Yeah. And again, I just, you know, if you've played Fallen Order, I would just say, like, consider how much different this would have been if the Fallen Jedi arc hadn't just ended on Dathomir, and instead that character showed up. It would have been less fun, but I think it would have been more narratively fulfilling in a way.
I mean, even as someone who, like, to close out the arc of, like, you know, Suriel and Trilla are both examples of people who either give in or resist the Force, to have that conflict in microcosm between him and, like, someone who completely said, like, no, I have the Force powers, why wouldn't I just use it to do whatever I want?
Right.
Versus someone who is very mired in the old ways and says, like, I am a Jedi, I am a knight, I am someone who protects people from being hurt, versus, like, well, we have to conclude the arc that we had with Trilla because, like, the Inquisitors are kind of the people who messed us up. That feels less thematically tied to the themes that the game is trying to relay, I think, in a lot of ways. But I don't know. I think it's a fun finale, especially for, like, a lot of the ways.
It is a fun finale.
Yeah. And in terms of gameplay, I think a lot of games stumble in a way of, like, you've been doing all these amazing things throughout the entire game. How are you going to make a finale feel special? And, you know, it's that instant cashing in of, well, we got Darth Vader.
We are in a Star Wars game.
Right.
And you just have to run for your life from him, which is
so, like, it is like the entire game you do feel like Superman, but it's like, no, here's, like, Darkseid, who is, like, this unstoppable force that is going to tame you, which is a cool way to end a game by saying, like, oh no, you're still in training, right? And then we have, after that Inquisition finale, we have the ending of them saying, like, we have the MacGuffin, right? We have the ability to do whatever we want with this, and he ends up destroying it, and then, you know, it's like, oh, where to next? Basically setting up the franchise.
And I don't know if we've established this, but the MacGuffin that they're chasing the entire game is, like, a list of young Jedi
right, and
Padawans.
with their locations and where, like, force-sensitive children.
Force-sensitive kids,
so the idea is, are we going to use them to, are we going to basically start the next generation of Jedi, which they weren't going to do that because we know what happens.
Which extra makes it feel like a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
You know.
But, you know, that they are in a place where it's like, okay, well, we've set up the thing that this entire game has told us to do, right? Like, this is the entire reason this crew got together. But what do you guys want from a sequel? Because it seems pretty likely, it's, like, from what we've heard, it's selling pretty well. So, like, where do you guys think they go from here?
I mean, I think in my head, if this list was so important and we haven't established that Jedi Master died, maybe it's finding out where he is, you know, and from there doing something. I don't know. They can't steal the Death Star plans again. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of wedged into a, very specific time period that I guess it could just be this crew of characters just goes on something completely different and doesn't have to be meddling in the overall intergalactic affairs of the Empire and stuff like that.
but that does seem to kind of fly in the face of like who Cal is by the end of this. He seems like the kind of person who meddles.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if nothing else, like I think the ending confirms that the next game will probably star Cal. Right, like, it's not going to be like an anthology series where it's like, the next Star Wars Jedi game is going to be about another character and another crew. It does see like they very heavily push you towards like this is the crew we've established, which is fine. Like I don't necessarily.
Yeah, there's room to go deeper.
Yeah, like that is a pretty solid lineup, I think, with Marin especially and Sarah, kind of working and Sarah being like a Force user now or having returned to the path of a Jedi. I will say that like I think. To your point, Jeff, I feel like the most compelling plot thread, like if I were Cal, I would be traumatized by the idea of Darth Vader and would want, like I feel like the most compelling storyline for him would be to like try to fight Darth Vader, but I don't know if that's the one that I want to see because I know how that ends, right? Like he's not going to kill Darth Vader unless they go Force Unleashed 2 where it's basically not canon because that's what happens, right? But like I have my issues with the game, both narratively and kind of structurally, as I mentioned on the MinnMax show. But, I think one of the running threads I've seen to this game is that, like, I'm really excited for the sequel. Like, there is a lot here. This is a really strong foundation for them to work with. So I'm interested in seeing what they do next for sure.
Yeah. We've talked about all the kind of problems that we have with the characters and the stories and stuff, but from a gameplay perspective, I was on board the entire time.
I think the combat is good enough. Like I had to learn a lot of the stuff that I learned in Sekiro because I think the parry timing works very differently than it does there. A lot of the tools are very different.
It really does.
But like it is a strong foundation to build another game around for sure. And if they iterate on that stuff, I think it could be like. To me, this doesn't feel like a Game of the Year candidate, but it feels like if they fix a lot of the problems that I have, like the next one is definitely like in contention.
Definitely, yeah. There's a lot of things that they could tighten up, even gameplay wise, especially narratively.
Yeah,
but
map design for me.
Map design, yeah. But I definitely whatever improvements that they can make, and Respawn is definitely capable of making those improvements. The next game is going to be incredible. But how did you feel about like the final decision to like destroy that holocron?
It's one of those moments where it kind of feels like it undermines everything that you've been trying to do at that point, but it also, looking back on it, it's like, well, ultimately it's a mission of just not letting this fall into the Empire's hands, which I appreciate, but I also feel like that could have just been the mission the entire time. Like they could have been saying, hey, we can't let this get out there, we have to destroy it. And I think that would have felt, once you got to that point, like that, like trying to twist it around where it's like, actually, I'm going to destroy it instead.
Yeah, I think the fact that they saved that for right at the end versus right after he has that vision, I think is kind of like a weird move, I think. But I think it does play to that story's strengths as like the self-contained, like, well, this can't have too many ramifications, and then kind of getting across like, well, it's the journey, it's not the destination, right?
Right.
Even if like it does have like an impact, right, for Cal, but I think that it's fine. I have my qualms with it as like a actual strategic plan
within the context
of the world.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that they kind of see into the future and say like, well, here's what was probably going to happen if we did that, and they kind of turn back away from it. It's not like we'll be good this time. We'll do it right.
Yeah. I guess I just would have liked. I would have liked if the story had taken into account like the context that they had already created around that, because maybe it's not necessarily restarting the Jedi Order, but you can definitely go save those kids so that the Empire
you can
isn't
be preventative, right?
Yeah. Like you don't have to necessarily train them, but go find them.
You can stop them from like whenever you see someone being attacked, you can say like, we know where they are, so we can stop the we can stop the bad guys.
Yeah.
But
now you can't do that, and it just was really galling to just, well, where are we going to go now? It's like, well, You had the
Now
answer
it's
like
fun time.
the
Party
answer
time.
like 5 seconds ago, Cal.
Let's shrug off our responsibility as teachers and Jedi and just say, let them do whatever they want.
Those kids are all dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I think
The kids are all dead.
Yeah,
We will end on that note. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jack. Thank you for watching. This was Max Spoilers. And tell you what, MinnMax has a whole host of other content, don't we, Suriel?
Yeah, you can
Whoa.
get some shows early, and if you subscribe to at the $5 tier, you can get the audio version of this show, and as well of all of our other video content. For that $5 tier. So definitely, if you like this episode and want to see more, definitely subscribe to our Patreon.
Podcasts, live streams. There's a whole Discord channel of community members always talking to each other that is available if you subscribe at any tier at patreon.com/MinnMax 2 N's. Thank you for watching.
That's it.
That's it.
See ya.
See ya.
See ya. Content like this is supported by the community on patreon.com/MinnMax.
And if you continue to support us and you're here long enough, you can even eventually hear me talk about Breath of the Wild 2.
Check us out. Thank you so much.